There we go. There we go. It's official. So good morning again. My name is Sarah Alexander, and I'm the Executive Director of the Redwood City Education Foundation. I'm also a Redwood City resident, and I am a Redwood City School District parent. On behalf of the organization and our wonderful, hardworking board, I am just so thankful that each of you are here as we recognize 40 years in the community. I'm so pleased that we are able to mark a milestone event like this by coming together at this event to look at where we've come from and to renew our commitment to our amazing students and our city. Your presence here today shows us that you care about education and the importance of continuing to dialogue around how we can evolve together to meet the needs of our students. As we begin this morning, we want to humbly acknowledge the land on which we stand as ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people. We recognize their continued connection and care for this land and commit to honoring their traditions and protecting the environment. As we talk today about equity and our future, it's important to take a moment and reflect and look back. We stand in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples, and we commit to working towards a more just and equitable world for all. It's my pleasure to see so many familiar faces and to acknowledge our public officials who are joining us this morning, including Redwood City Mayor Jeff G., Vice Mayor. Kindly hold your applause. I have a number of dignitaries to introduce. We have Vice Mayor Lizette Garnica, Council Member Elmer Martinez Ceballos, our Redwood City School District Superintendent, Dr. John Baker, Redwood City School District Board of Trustees President Cecilia Marquez, and Trustee Mike Wells, San Mateo County Board of Education Trustee Hugo Torres, Housing and Human Concerns Katie Getz, and former Mayor Redwood City Mayor Giselle Hale. Their commitment to education in Redwood City is inspiring, and we are just so grateful to have your presence here this morning. And as we begin, of course, I want to thank our partners. We are grateful to have the support and presence of our friends from Prince Street Partners, from Oracle, Google, and of course, none of us would be here. I hope we all recognize the privilege that we have to be here this morning in this beautiful space, thanks to CZI. We're grateful for this resource that they provide to nonprofits like ours. So thank you to CZI. This morning, I would like to use this opportunity to talk about where we have come from, where we currently are, and where we hope to be. The Redwood City Education Foundation, and you'll hear me refer to it as RCEF as I speak, we were formed back in 1983. Like many education foundations in the state, we began in response to Proposition 13. Ed foundations like ours started around this time, and it was started in response by parents who were deeply concerned about how this measure was going to limit the amount of public revenue going to our public schools. Since the 80s, California, back at that time, we were seen as having one of the best public education systems in the nation. And over the decades, we have steadily declined into the bottom 20 percentile. Proposition 13 makes the jobs of our district and our school leadership difficult, as providing quality education to a diverse student population is about supporting students where they're at. And of course, that requires the financial resources needed to serve the individual and collective needs of students. As many of us who are parents know, we see in Redwood City that, for lack of resources, schools are expected to have PTOs to come in and raise these funds. However, we can see just within our own district that there is a great variance between what our schools are able to ask of parents, what parents are able to contribute, and then what ultimately ends up being funded. It's easy to see when you think about this as the way to fill those needs. It's easy to understand and see why we have students of color and lower income students, they're at a disadvantage. Another piece, when we talk about education, I think a lot of times we talk about good schools equating with good test scores. But I hope we realize as we are continuing to evolve that test scores are really just such an antiquated way of thinking about the value that our schools and that our education bring. As the world becomes smaller and we are becoming more connected, and as our society and economy continue to evolve, so must we in the way that we think around the value of our education as it relates to preparing our youth to be thoughtful, contributing community members. Test scores may be a part of the story, but they're not the whole story. So a little bit of history about us. So as I mentioned, we started back in 1983, but in 2018, RCEF decided to take a pause and think about how we're using the small amount of resources coming into the organization. When you look on the peninsula, there is vast difference. Whereas our neighboring ed foundations are able to generate millions of dollars on an annual basis for their public school students, we here in Redwood City, we struggle to raise a fraction of what they're able to raise, despite serving more schools and more students combined than the both of those combined. It was important for us as an organization to reflect on how we are being good stewards of these resources and how we best serve this diverse student population. So in 2019, we made the intentional shift to move from providing schools to all schools across the district to focusing on 3 schools. And we made the shift with a focus and emphasis on those schools serving elementary school students. These 3 schools have no PTO fundraising arm. They have the greatest percentage of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch. They also have the greatest percentage of English language learners, emerging bilingual and multilingual learners, and the lowest test scores. If you saw when we had the slide scrolling this morning, you'll see that these 3 schools are also geographically clustered. They're all 3 located on the other side, on the east side of El Camino, separated from the other 9 schools in the district. So our mission now, as a result of this process in 2019, states that RCEF supports the increased academic performance of underserved K-8 public school students by addressing social emotional resilience, mental health, and academic readiness. And we are doing this by providing direct financial support to schools, targeted advocacy, and meaningful community engagement. So today we are here to talk about how and why educational inequities disproportionately affect students of color and low-income families. A lot of this stems from historical discrimination, from lack of access to quality education resources and systemic barriers. It's important for all of us, and all of us here who are representing, we are here as parents, as community leaders, as local government representatives, as community partners. We need to continue to talk about how we can collaborate resources and share these resources so that everyone, regardless of their background or their neighborhood, can succeed. If we can increase access to quality education resources, we can give our children the chance to changing the trajectory of their future. This morning, we are so privileged to have our panelists who are up here to help us understand the complexity and the depth of why community-driven solutions are essential to thoughtfully helping fill the gap between the public funding that exists and the resources that are needed at our schools. I'm so excited to bring our panelists into the discussion. We have with us this morning Dr. Amy Gernstein from the John W. Gardner Center for Youth and Their Communities. Next to Dr. Gernstein is Principal Guzman, Lupe Guzman. She's the principal at Hoover Community School. Next to her is Pati Ortiz. She is the former Redwood City School District Director of Community Schools and Partnerships, and she's also a current Redwood City RCEF board member. And here closest to me, we have Brianna Evans. She's from the city of Redwood City. I wanted to give each of our panelists just a few minutes to introduce yourselves and your connection to the topic that we are discussing today.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you to the Redwood City Education Foundation for this invitation and for the opportunity to be with so many old friends and new friends. This is a real treat and an honor to be here today. I represent the John W. Gardner Center for Youth and Their Communities, as Sarah mentioned, and we are a research and policy center that focuses on community engaged research. And really our focus is on doing work that is actionable. And so that requires working in close partnership with folks in the community. And it's been a real treat today to see folks, many of whom I haven't seen since before the pandemic, but also a number of people have come up to me and said, I've never seen you in person. And which really is a testament to how we've all worked well and persistently during this challenging time. And so I want to acknowledge we have been working in long-standing partnership in the city of Redwood City for over 20 years. I've been at the Gardner Center for almost 14, but our partnership in Redwood City precedes my tenure. And we work in close connection with the city of Redwood City, with Redwood City Together, which was originally, or not even originally, which was Redwood City 2020, and we were there then. With the Redwood City School District, with the Sequoia High School District, and more. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have a good sense of what's happening in a community. And so part of what I have the opportunity to help talk about today is how the context of what's happening here in Redwood City, especially as it relates to the county writ large, and to highlight some of the good works that are going on here that we've been studying. And I just want to acknowledge how unusual the level of partnership is that I see in Redwood City, the collaboration that was evident in how everyone was chatting away before our panel began. So I want to thank you for having me here, and I look forward to our equity-focused conversation.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning. My name is Lupe Guzman. I am a product of the Redwood City School District, and I am the current Hoover Community School principal. I came to the United States when I was 4, and I went to Haas Elementary and McKinley Middle School back then. And I was a child who did not speak English. I was our Hoover kids. Fast forward, after graduating from college, I wanted to become a teacher, and I decided to come back to Redwood City and give back to the community that gave so much to me. I was a teacher at Taft for many years. Michelle Griffith recruited me as her VP and encouraged me to go into administration, something I never thought I'd do. And now I'm principal at Hoover. And I'm here because I'm very grateful for community schools and the partnerships we have with all the organizations that support our students, that fill that gap. And thank you to RCEF for working very closely to fill the needs for our students so that we can focus on their learning. And we'll talk a little bit more about community schools and how important they are. So I'm going to hand it off to Patti.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us early on a Tuesday. I'm Patti Ortiz, and I used to oversee our community school model and family resource centers in Redwood City. Because of that experience, I wholeheartedly believe in the power that community schools hold by creating a structure of accountability, of communication, of transparency, and really sets up all these amazing partners that we have and want to do the work, and it sets them up for success through that model. It sets up our kids and our families up for success. Fast forward, I'm a parent, seeing my own children go through their ups and downs, and I know the power of interventions. I know the power of targeted services, of making sure we meet everyone where they're at. And I also know the amount of resources and advocacy and will it takes to make sure those are there. And I am very proud to be part of the Redwood City Education Foundation, who believes wholeheartedly in naming, understanding, and acknowledging head on the things that we need to do to build our community and strengthen it.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Brianna Evans, she, her pronouns. I'm Redwood City's Equity and Inclusion Officer. My job is both about looking at the outcomes within our workforce and the outcomes within our city to make sure everybody's getting a fair shake here. Our intention is really to have a community where everyone can thrive. Our council has set a really clear vision for the future. We want to be a community where everyone of every background and income level is able to succeed. That means we have to really look at what are we doing and how are we doing it to make sure that we're paying attention to the communities and the people, the individuals, the kids that aren't able to get a fair shake right now. So that's the work that I do, and it only happens in partnership across our city and across our community. So excited to be here with this panel of wonderful folks who are doing this work in different ways, and eager to be in conversation with you as our community.
Thank you all so much. Because today's topic, we're using this word equity quite a bit, and we're relating it to the education sector. I wanted to give Brianna the opportunity to just take us through a general overview of what do we mean when we're talking about equity, because I think this will give us a lens as the panelists have a discussion following Brianna's presentation. It'll really help us center and place our thinking around our discussion for education equity. So Brianna, could I invite you here? And I'm going to ask our panelists to take a seat in the front row.
All right. So I will just offer a brief overview of what we mean by a few different terms. Often when we get into conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, I find that people are using words differently, and that is completely okay. There are different ways we might use these words. And to help have a productive conversation together, it's helpful to have a level set on what we mean. So these are the ways Redwood City as a city uses the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talk about diversity as a fact, equity as a goal, and inclusion as a practice. This is a framework that comes from an organizer, Derica Blackman from the East Bay, who is fantastic, and you should look at her work. The idea that diversity as a fact acknowledges that there are a ton of ways that we are different and our lived experiences are different. As we walk through life with different nationalities, races, classes, educational experiences, families of origin, these things shape both the way we look at the world and also the way that the world takes us in as well. When we talk about equity as a goal, we're talking about building an equitable society, one in which all can participate and prosper. The goal really has to be to create a place with the conditions that allow everyone to reach their full potential. So what we're thinking about here is what does it require for everyone, for every kid in every school to reach their full potential, and recognizing that we're not all starting at the same place in that journey. So a couple of different images. I find that visuals are really helpful as we're talking about what we mean by equity. Equity and equality are two different strategies for fairness, and sometimes we get caught on which one do we want to use in a certain circumstance. When we're talking about equity, we're talking about a strategy that focuses on getting people what they need to succeed. When we're talking about equality, we're talking about a strategy that focuses on giving everyone the same thing. So in this image at the top, we see equality. Everyone's gotten the same pair of red tennis shoes. Same thing for everybody. Fair. At the bottom, we see everybody's gotten the pair of tennis shoes that works for them according to quality, performance, fit, style, comfort. We're making sure that folks have what they need to achieve the goals that they have. And that looks different in different circumstances. This image is also one that I like, the idea that equality is sameness. If we're looking at the racetrack, if you've ever watched the Olympics or seen a track meet at a school, you've seen that there is actually a staggered start in the race. That's because the racetrack is an oval. So the person on the inside is going to have a literally shorter race to run if you all start at the same point. Because the context is different for each one of the runners, the track needs to be set up appropriately for all of us to be looking at merit and not just looking at where did the person start the race. So we have built into the sport this idea of an equitable start. Everyone's starting at the right place to ensure that they have the same distance to run, and we're not just tracking starting places in the final results. One of the things we sometimes get caught on in thinking about how this idea of equity applies in our community is what does it really look like to share resources across the community? In this image on the left with equality, we see community resources going in equal amounts to two different parts of the community, but they don't have an equal need. One side of the community is really thriving with the amount of resources it's getting, and the other side of the community is not yet thriving with the amount of resources it's getting. So in that case, we want our whole community to thrive, which means we need to adjust the way we are sharing the resources. It doesn't mean taking anything away from the right-hand side, but it does mean providing additional supports to the left-hand side to make sure that everyone is able to get to the thriving community we want. One more, this one is probably a little bit more familiar. So there on the left-hand side is an image of equality where three people are trying to see a baseball game. There's a fence in front of them and it has a different height. So the barriers are different for each person. We also see they're standing on ground that isn't even. So the starting place for every person, the conditions that they're facing in life are not the same either. So when we offer each person a box, they're not all able to see the game easily. We see the person in blue is having a great time watching the game. The person in red is able to stretch to just be able to see it. They're making it work as best they can. And the person in yellow, it might be hard to see, but they're actually looking through a hole in the fence. A reminder that marginalized communities find ways to get their needs met, even in challenging conditions. And sometimes those ways are criminalized. On the right-hand side, we see we've focused on equity. Same conditions, but we've given everybody the number of boxes that they need to be able to achieve the shared goal of seeing the game. Here we have the same thing happening at the top, except now they're trying to watch a marching band. At the bottom, we have the idea of justice, which is about the active dismantling of the barriers that prevent us from achieving our goals in our community, and the idea of liberation, the condition in which we don't face those barriers. So looping back to where we started, diversity, equity, inclusion. This idea of inclusion as a practice. In Redwood City, we talk about inclusion as a daily action and effort of creating a sense of belonging through authentic and empowered participation. This means everyone has a voice. What we're aiming for is building a community in which everyone is able to be heard and everyone is able to participate in civic life here. Inherent in the idea of a practice is that sometimes we're going to get it wrong. If we're practicing an instrument, sometimes you're going to play the wrong note. But if you tossed out your flute or your piano or your guitar or whatever it is you play the first time you play the wrong note, you're not going to ever reach harmony. You're not going to ever be able to play a full song. So what we recognize here is that in the effort to include, in the effort to make sure that all of us are heard, that all of us are able to show up with our best selves to reach our full potential and be in community together, sometimes we will make mistakes. And it is crucial that we keep working at it, that we not give in to the discomfort that comes from getting it wrong, but still figure out, how do we keep this going? How do we do it better next time? How do we recognize the challenges and adapt and overcome them? In Redwood City's strategic plan, there is a foundational guiding principle of equity added by our council in 2020. It says that Redwood City will put equity first, urging a collective restart so that policies serve the entire community. This is an ambitious goal, and it really applies to the way our city operates. And we find that many of our partners are interested in the same kind of question. How do we make sure that we are serving our entire community through the work that we do? Our intention as a government and our responsibility is to serve our entire community. That's a question of institutional effectiveness. If we're not serving our whole community, we're not doing our whole job. So when we look to our community, we want to work with folks to try to make sure that our entire community is being served by the beautiful resources and opportunities available here. To that end, Sarah talked a little bit about disparities or inequities. So those places where the outcomes are not even. When we look in Redwood City, the Redwood City School District, this chart shows the percentage of unduplicated, free and reduced price meals provided to students in school districts. So if we look at the percentage of students that are receiving free and reduced lunch in Redwood City School District overall, it's 65.3% of the population. In the three schools that Redwood City Education Foundation, I almost said Redwood City together. In the three schools that Redwood City Education Foundation serves, that percentage is 93%. So we see there is a great disparity there, that some schools have many more students who need free and reduced lunches than others. Again, this map that you saw previously, we see those schools are also located in a similar area. They're all east of El Camino. There are some deep historical reasons we could get into about some of the reasons geography is deeply connected to income and opportunity in American communities. We will save that lecture time for another space. But just to point out again that there are some real differences. So the need is not the same in all parts of our community, either geographically or within each school. So that is some of the work that RCEF is taking into account as they take an equity focus in their efforts. They're thinking about where is there the need and what supports can we offer to ensure that everyone in our community genuinely has that opportunity to thrive, to fulfill their potential. I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Here. Thank you so much for that presentation, particularly as we start to talk about Redwood City. And one of the last two slides there really helped us also see the diversity that exists here on the peninsula, right? When we think about where we are in the context of many other cities and towns. And then again, when we zoom in Redwood City on the focus on our three schools. So I wanted to start off today's discussion by, thinking about why is it in Redwood City we're seeing that the needs are not the same? What is some of the disparity that exists across Redwood City?
Good morning. In thinking about disparity, as Brianna's excellent presentation, thank you, pointed out this morning, there are so many different variables that we could be looking at. I think what's interesting about looking at it from a socioeconomic perspective, the way Brianna's slide pointed out, free and reduced price lunch, as many of you know, is a proxy indicator for poverty. And when we see that there's a real spread of those who have those schools that have high rates of students living in poverty versus low rates, we also see very different kinds of things happening in that community. One of the opportunities that we had recently was to look at the ways that the COVID pandemic was influencing the experience of folks in our community. And the Redwood City Education Foundation, the City of Redwood City, and Redwood City Together, and some other local foundations came together and asked the Gardner Center if we would try to gather data on what was happening here in Redwood City and how the pandemic was influencing folks in a variety of ways. And I mentioned that even though we're theoretically post-COVID, because these are indicators of the ways in which our neighbors have been having very differential experiences. So we conducted a study that was where we surveyed what was ultimately about 4 to 5% of Redwood City's community. And we made sure we were sampling in a way that we are sure had a representative, was a true representative sample of the community. And we looked at where people were, their geography and so on. And we collected data in the fall of 2020 and in the spring of 2021. And one of the things that we learned was that there were a set of areas that were huge concerns for certain segments of the population. And the first was housing insecurity. And this is a theme that I'm sure you hear about all the time, but folks who were initially in the early stages of the pandemic were immediately facing higher rates of housing insecurity. They had fears of being evicted, even though there was eviction protection. They had real challenges just meeting their needs. And this was true of people who were renting and people who owned. And when we looked geographically, you won't be surprised that the folks on the east side of Redwood City had a much harder time. And that was, sometimes we really made an effort to do this. And we had, the survey was in English and Spanish, and our friends at Redwood City Together helped collect the data. We made sure we were looking to folks who were really trying to access services. So whether they were showing up for grocery handouts or distribution or meal distribution, or in just a whole variety of ways. And the school district helped us do that. So housing insecurity, food insecurity, and concerns about employment. And these issues were, they endured through the entire pandemic. And what I do want to say is when we think about a lot of these things in terms of also healthcare insecurity, it was disproportionately high on the east side in North Fair Oaks. It stayed constant overall through this whole period of time, but the share of extreme insecurity was much higher on the east side. We also had many more examples of folks who were experiencing food insecurity. They were hungry. And when we think about barriers to success in school, that's one that's very tangible and easy for folks to think about. How can you learn when you're hungry? And we also know from work we've done with surveying and interviewing students that students often know when their families are experiencing challenges, even housing insecurity. We have done studies where students tell us about looking on Craigslist for their parents to look for opportunities to move. That's not something that we want our young people doing, obviously. And this is not about families not protecting their students, their children. It's about the reality that everyone is aware of. So I could go on. I mean, there are plenty of bright spots and things that some things did improve over the course of time. But one of the things we really saw was things to be really different and experienced in unequal ways and inequitable ways in our community.
I think I just want to highlight that we tend to think of educational outcomes, and when we see these disparities, we try to bring our lens, zoom in right back into the schools or the school districts. And the reason why education outcomes are so broadly talked about is because, well, schools are very data-driven institutions. So they're great indicators to kind of be able to understand our communities and demographics. However, they're telling a bigger story. Educational outcomes are traced to every other community and systems level barriers. And I think that's important to highlight within the context of education equity. When we think of the disparity in outcomes we see with our students, it is telling a broader story of what our kids are going through in their families, not in the classroom, not in the school hallway, but in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their lives. And I think we need to take the opportunity to think about education outcomes should be the indicator. They're a great indicator for success through adulthood and beyond. Yet they're also an opportunity to say, it's a community effort, and it is the great place to intersect all these supports, all these conversations around what impacts young people.
One of the things that we talked about as a panel before this, I come from a health background, so I worked in public health before I came to work in a city. And when we look at health outcomes, we see that only about 15% of it is related to directly what's happening in your healthcare interaction with your provider. This is similar with schools. It's not just about what's happening in the school. There are all of these interrelated systems when we're talking about housing, when we're talking about food access that aren't directly about what's happening at school, but are affecting educational outcomes. It's one of the things I think is important to underscore as we're talking about why would RCEF focus on a few schools. It's not because those schools are doing a bad job. It's not like we could just swap out the teachers and then we would have a whole different set of outcomes. It is actually about a whole set of things that are going on around these schools that influence opportunity for the youth that are in them. And it really requires us to look at the 85%. The big chunk that's not directly about the in-school interactions to figure out how can we drive change.
And I think this is why community schools are so essential to addressing education for our students, because we need to look beyond just the educational factors. We need to look at the social, emotional, intellectual, and physical needs of our students. And community schools, and I hope Pati explains a little bit more, really bring together services for our families. They serve as a hub. It's a safe place where families know they can come and we'll figure it out together.
So can I, I wanted to ask two questions. Well, one question before we get to talking about community schools, but I know Dr. Bernstein, Pati, and Brianna have talked a little bit about all these things that are going on at home, that are going on in our communities, right? The pressures that parents are feeling. How do you see this, Principal Guzman? How is this showing up in our schools?
So if we go back to when we first had to go to distance learning, we really got a glimpse at how our kids were living. And some of our kids do not have a quiet space at home. They're doubled up, meaning they live with another family, or tripled up. And through the progression of the pandemic, things got more and more difficult. And so families started moving in with each other. Inflation really affected the resources our families could access. We had students who were working out of a closet because that was the only quiet space they had. RCEF donated noise canceling headphones, which was amazing because it allowed a household that maybe had 8 kids in it to put on their headphones, get into their little nook and take class from their Chromebook. We had food distributions on campus for the families once a month, but we also had lunches where our cafeteria ladies were amazing. They would provide breakfast, lunch, and eventually some dinners. Boys and girls provided dinners. And we had lines so long, it was affecting the traffic on Middlefield, on Woodside, and even the freeway. And so that tells you the need that we had. Also, we have seen a rise of unhoused individuals, especially around our campus in the Hoover Park, around the bridge, impacting the safety of our kids. Families prefer to go through Woodside Middlefield intersection instead of going on the bridge because they're afraid that someone who may be drugged will interact negatively with them. There was a shooting in the park over summer, and then our first Friday back on campus, there was another shooting. So there's a lot going on. It's compounding incidents is that our families are feeling unsafe, insecure. There's a lot of food insecurity, a lot of housing insecurity, and a lot of mental health needs have arisen. And it might be partially because there's a lot of talk about the need for mental health, and the stigma maybe isn't as big as it used to be. But you have to think from a child's perspective. I'm hungry. I don't know if we're going to get kicked out of our house. I'm scared of the homeless man that lives, the unhoused man that lives at the corner. And I don't have money for laundry, so I'm wearing my dirty clothes again. How can we expect this particular child to come in, leave everything at the door, and be ready to learn? Those are a lot of the factors that some of our students are facing. And this is why the community work is important. And I'll share some other stories later of how we have come together as a community to really target some of these concerns and work together to making the Hoover community a safer and happier place.
Thank you so much. You know, I do think we are all shaped by our own perspectives and what we see right in front of us. So it is helpful to understand how, when we're talking about a lot of issues that are going on and may feel like they're other or they're somewhere else, they're really going on for our kids here in Redwood City. When I joined RCEF this past summer, Patti was one of the first people I met with. And I remember she was orienting me. We were talking about community schools and, you know, community schools. And honestly, I thought we were talking about like neighborhood schools. I didn't really understand the weight of what community schools means. So can you help us understand what community schools are? What are they providing? And why are they here in Redwood City?
I'll try to make this short. I get excited. Okay. So community schools are based on the premise that the stronger the partnership between school and community, the better the outcomes are both ways. So you really create a community hub in the schools, being neighborhood schools. It's the school that's close to you, the school you have walking, or hopefully walking access to. It's just a default place for community to gather. You're dropping the kids there in the morning. So what we try to do is understanding that no one leaves their issues at the door, not little ones, not grown-ups. How can we best serve them? Schools provide a place of access. No one has access to kids more hours in a day, more days in a year than schools. So if I'm thinking as a privileged white collar family and I can leave my Zoom midday and drive my kid 2 towns over for therapy and then come back because I can do work when I want and you know, do Instacart for my shopping, that's not the reality for a lot of our families. But if we make sure services are where they're at, they are free, they are bicultural, bilingual, and they are in a place they trust, because we've built strong partnerships of trust. We have shared leadership, we have community input and voice. Then we are just breaking down so many barriers to even getting the services, let alone thinking about, I don't have access to those services. I don't have financial access to those services. I wouldn't even know where to get them. We're getting rid of transportation issues, childcare issues, linguistic issues. And the community schools are not just a place where services convene. They're a model that is intentional about shared partnership with community, about empowering families as well and doing capacity building. We offer parenting classes, adult ed, leadership structures that are different and culturally responsive. But we also have a different structure from an administrator's point, where we have the community school coordinator working in tandem with the principal, overseeing all these wraparound services. So we take it just as seriously as we take math and reading outcomes. We think we have a person that's dedicated to create quality control, to create the conditions of success. So your mental health nonprofit, your county behavioral health, your Second Harvest, we're going to be here. We're going to put everything in place so that you're successful, and we're going to connect the dots. It is very taxing to navigate systems, but if you have a dedicated advocate at the school thinking of children holistically and knowing what they need and connecting all those dots, being a bridge to the family, being a bridge between services, and then making sure things are happening with the level of quality we expect, it's a win-win. All these service providers need access to clients, right? That's what their mandate is. I was created to provide these services. we have the clients. It's a partnership. It's beautiful. Let's make it easy for everyone to do what we're meant to do in the most successful way. And we do it in a way that, because it's a model and not just a place where we have a bunch of services housed, we're constantly changing the narrative. We're constantly talking about things from a whole child, whole family perspective and highlighting what childhood development is really about through that lens.
So in Redwood City, we have 12 schools across the district. Are all schools community schools?
They are not. And the reason is, as I was mentioning before, it really is about equity. I mean, ideally, in a different world, all schools would be fully equipped with all these services because we know they're needed. We know kids everywhere need these things. The difference between a child needing this in one school or another is, are there private resources to access those services or not? And we have community schools in the places where we say, we know it takes a village. Let us be your village. Let us come together and do this together. And by doing that, we build this trust where then we become a community hub for other things like building social and economical capital, where we're having issues with crime and insecurity. That's where we meet and we create our own little town halls. And that's where we help craft an opportunity to mobilize, to advocate, and to voice. Community schools are really about meeting families where they're at. Again, ideally, they would be everywhere. But if I know some families have the ability to system navigate, transport their children elsewhere, privately pay for services that they need, and others don't, well, we're going to go where the need is at. We're going to know where we know we can provide the best impact.
Just to comment briefly on the resources part, I love, Pati, that you named that resources are not just about the financial piece, but also the time that parents have, the flexibility they have, the familiarity with systems. Those things all influence how accessible opportunity is in our community. And when we're thinking just on the money part, we can miss out on some of the real barriers that prevent folks from getting access to what they need.
I just wanted to add to what my colleagues and friends have been saying about community schools. While there may not be a formal community school program at every school in Redwood City, the school district has a community school philosophy and approach. You don't have to be in the neighborhood of Hoover, for example, to enjoy some of the benefits of the community school programming. If your family needs groceries, for example, or access connection to other services, as Pati mentioned, you can go to another community school, even if it's not in your neighborhood, and even if your student isn't enrolled. And I think that's something that is profoundly important and unusual about Redwood City. And this has to do with a long-standing commitment and having partnerships like RCEF that helps make sure that happens. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that during the pandemic and at other times of crisis, it has been the community schools in this community that have been most able and first ready to support the community. So when other aspects of the community were sort of scrambling and thinking, how do we reach our folks? These community schools, these 3 schools on the east side that RCEF has been targeting, already had strong relationships with their community. So that was where families turned. And that's an incredible opportunity to support our entire community and to support those who are most in need. And I really admire the long-standing work that went into that, because you can't just start in one day. These are all long-standing commitments and programs.
Thank you for sharing that. It's that trust and that relationship that's so crucial. This past year, after the shooting in the park, our parents were very scared. And at one of our cafecitos, we invited the Redwood City PD to come, and we saw it as an opportunity to bring the Redwood City Police Department in and build a stronger relationship with our parents. And they brought in a bilingual police officer, and there was a really nice conversation about safety and the needs of our community. And Florence from our RCEF was there. Thank you, Florence. She's like, you all need to go speak to city council. And guess what we did? We went to the city council, and that ignited a chain of events where our families felt empowered. We were connected to other members of the community. We were connected to Public Works. So the Redwood City PD really helped with security and the cleanup of the park. City of Redwood City and Public Works worked with us on traffic. The flow of traffic has improved. They even switched one of the lights during key hours of the day so that traffic flowed better. And the park got cleaned up. They removed benches. They helped the unhoused move on to other destinations. They cleaned up the bridge and put fencing that was sturdier so that they couldn't go through the fencing. And we also got to talk about the pedestrian safety. We got to talk about, the crossing between Middlefield and El Camino, and how for that small group of families that live over by Target, it's a very difficult walk if you don't have a vehicle, and it's very unsafe. Some of our students in the past have been assaulted by some of the unhoused because they don't want to walk half an hour to 45 minutes around. So they walk on Woodside, and that's so dangerous. So again, that created a conversation. A couple of weeks ago, we had some of the city planners at one of our cafecitos talking about, well, what do you need and what would it look like to have a safe crossover between Middlefield and El Camino? And again, it's those partnerships that and that trust in the community, in the Hoover Community School, that allow parents to feel like I can voice my opinion in my language. I can advocate for my neighborhood in a safe space and in a way that we feel supported.
Thank you. So it's helpful for us we've talked a little bit about, what's going on in Redwood City, some of the issues going around our three schools, what community schools are doing. So this is a tremendous resource. So if community schools are providing additional support to targeted schools, what are the needs that are still existing and why aren't they being met?
So, well, there's so much to just unpack about disparities, population level disparities. RCEF really goes about the work with a lot of hope and optimism. And I really think it's important to name that. Interventions work, programs work. Most of us here know it as a parent or caregiver. We've had a moment where we might need something extra. Personally, our kids, these things work. So we know the programs we fund work. We need more. I think one of the things Principal Guzman highlighted is, for example, mental health. We still have wait lists, but these programs work. RCEF was able to fund a new behavioral specialist at her school, which I'm going to let her talk about, but one position that was trauma-informed, change whole classroom behavior, change practices at a school, because sometimes you can't do one-on-one intervention. It's too expensive, so we find the balance between how do we change environment, how we support the child. And these things work, and we're doing them, and we want to do more of them. Go deeper in the schools we're at, go to more schools. And I think to the point we've been talking about lately, one of our three key mandates is advocacy as well, right? And I think this is why this is a powerful panel of different lenses, different people thinking about advocacy through the bigger lens. As Brianna said, only 50% of the outcomes are related to what happens within the health institution. I don't know that number for education, but there are a lot of things in our community that we can all rally around. And when it comes to community schools, let's make sure that we have the equal starting point. Let's make sure that we're on equal ground by understanding our humanity around those needs.
I would like to build on what Patti just said. Mental health is an area that has been identified by the school district and others in this community that precedes the pandemic. The pandemic clearly exacerbated this. You really can't open any source of news without seeing challenges or descriptions of challenges by young people and young adults and actually all ages that are related to mental health. The isolation and the challenges that everyone experienced during the pandemic only exacerbated what were pre-existing challenges. The Redwood City School District and the Sequoia High School District were first approached by Stanford to talk about what were some pressing needs that we could partner together on. And this conversation began in 2019 and has targeted mental health. And so a collaborative was formed, and the Gardner Center has been working in partnership with folks from the School of Medicine in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry with the school district. And the school district has prioritized having a counselor, a mental health counselor at every site, and RCEF had a big hand in supporting that. And so we're, what I can say from the perspective of the Gardner Center is that these needs have been they're clearly persisting, and having a structure, having an opportunity to already get going before some crises started was critical. We clearly all haven't addressed the needs sufficiently, but we've done a lot. And what we've seen is that the partnership is, and having the opportunity to work with RCEF, with Stanford, and with experts at the school district has really enabled the schools to better serve the students.
I wanted to ask a question. I talked about that RCF. Now we've changed our focus and we're focusing on schools with no PTO. Why is it that we have schools that don't have a PTO? And what void does that leave?
I think when we mentioned Prop 13 and kind of the popping of education foundations is we understand that public dollars don't take us the whole way if we're thinking of whole child development and outcomes into adulthood. And then there's a stark difference in what private dollars supplement some schools and some communities versus the others. PTO, going back to our conversation, is not just about financial capacity. It's about time. It's about organizing capacity. If our families are working 2 and 3 jobs, they don't have the same capacity to be building a PTO. And let alone asking the families we're trying to support, because we know there are disparities and injustices in the way that they exist in our communities. Are we going to be asking them to pull out the money and support the school? We're saying we are public servants, we're a school, we're part of the community and the social contract that's here to support you, not the other way around. And that is what equity is about. Our schools don't have PTOs. It's also, to be honest, a very rigid institution. It comes with its taxing and accounting needs and all these things that are just hard to navigate and are just not a priority. Our families are incredibly dedicated and engaged to their child's academic success. It just looks different. It looks at home. It looks with quality time, with building a love for learning, with being there and supporting. We don't need it to look like PTOs, not at the moment. We are here to support and partner with our families. And not the other way around. The partnership is there and they provide immense support. They provide immense resources. They just look different. And when we have a community that's prospering across the peninsula, across Redwood City, there are enough avenues to make sure that private funds also reach students in every corner.
Can you talk a little bit, Principal Guzman, about what parent participation looked like at Hoover?
Pati gave us great examples. Our parents engage with our students and with our community in very different ways. So when they, after they get home at 9, from a very long day of working, they sit down and read with their students. They ask about their homework. They go over the parent portal to look at the assignments. They email the teacher, text the teacher, call the teacher to find out what's going on. They will come to our community events, our literacy nights, our cafecitos, our winter festivals, our kermes, our Dia del Niño this Saturday, 11 to 2, if you want to come. I'll plug that in. And they'll email us or call us or show up in the office and say, can we have a conversation? Here are my concerns, or I have this friend who wants to do this at the school. So they leverage their resources to support the school in a non-traditional way.
I wanted to also acknowledge that the concept of sort of leveraging resources is not one that is universally known and understood. And having an institution that community members feel a trusting relationship with enables them to cross so many barriers that and to have one place that they feel safe and known really makes a huge difference. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the Gardner Center studied Redwood City's community schools for over 10 years. And one of the very compelling and persistent findings was that those students whose families were engaged in any kind of community school programming, those students enjoyed significantly better outcomes. Their attendance was sometimes 12 days a year more than their peers. That's very significant. Their rate of becoming English proficient was also much higher. And so there's a whole diversity of ways that families engage. And I think part of what makes the community schools, and these 3 schools in particular, so powerful is that they provide lots of entry points for families. And any of those really seem to have a huge influence on student success.
I love that Amy highlighted the different ways that folks are coming into engagement with the school. Back to those ideas of diversity and inclusion, there are a range of different ways that parents and children are showing up at the door, a range of different experiences, and plenty of parents that have not gone through the US academic system. So this is not a totally familiar concept for everyone, and there may be a very different way that they're used to seeing parent engagement. So it's exciting to hear Lupe and Pati talk about how to look at the strengths of the ways parents are engaging and leverage those, rather than trying to force parents and children into a system that is more familiar for us, even though it may not be more familiar or more effective or more helpful for those families. So really looking at how do we adapt our systems and our own processes to suit the needs of our families, rather than adapting our families to suit the systems that we already have.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, which is, we think about academic performance as indicators for how well schools are doing. What are some of the other things that we should be thinking about when we think about what is a healthy school, what is a good school, what is a quality school?
Our world is changing so rapidly. I keep telling my teachers, we don't know what we're training our students to be because those jobs haven't been created yet. And really, I think beyond the grades, we need to think, are we creating good citizens? Are we creating critical thinkers? Are we creating a community that values each other, that values empathy and equity, and students who believe in themselves. Also, one of the things that we're really looking closely at is that social emotional learning right now. There is a mental health crisis. Our students are spending more and more time in front of a screen in this world that isn't really real. And that is affecting the way that they are developing their relationships and the way they see themselves. So how do we counterbalance all that noise out there with self-confidence and integrity? So we need to, a long explanation for a short answer. How do we create students who are confident in who they are and who give back to the community? And I think part of the community schools, part of the work is bringing in the mental health, bringing in the social emotional learning, bringing opportunities for self-advocacy, for a connection to the city, a connection to make their space a better space, and in turn create a stronger Redwood City. Because if we have strong students across the board, our city is stronger.
I just want to add an E that Lupe left out that I know she believes in. So she talked about instilling empathy and equity. I want to say, because as an outsider, they instill a lot of excellence too. Hoover, Garfield, Taft have incredible high expectations for their teams, for their students and their families. I had the privilege of witnessing it for so many years. Lupe was my first principal when I worked in the district. And just to say that we never miss that mark. We have absolute faith in the capacity and the inherent talent and skills of our students. And our teachers and our families and our kids work so, so hard. And going back to Brianna's awesome visuals, I love the loop racetrack one. I hadn't seen it. It's about making sure we have a starting point that lets us build on that. They're still going to run very hard and be Olympic medalists. But we can't do that if one is having to hike Everest and the others running down El Camino.
I also want to acknowledge that there are things you can measure. We can measure social and emotional health. And there are traditional measures that are indicators of how excellent a community is doing. From attendance, which really is a good measure of engagement. In particular, there are measures of chronic absence, which means that students are missing 10% or more of the school year. That's something that Redwood City has been focusing on reducing for many years. And you can imagine that if students aren't attending, they're going to have a hard time excelling. It also means they potentially are getting into trouble, or they have they're potentially they're more vulnerable. That's what we see if they are not attending. So attendance is an example. Another example of school excellence has to do with discipline rates. Who's getting in trouble? What kind of trouble are they getting into? And to what extent are we really creating a sense of belonging in this and a culture of belonging in this community, in our school communities where students are not acting out? And how are we making sure we have a really holistic view of what good behavior looks like, and that it's culturally responsive, and that our teachers are well equipped to do that. So all of those are things you can measure. And finally, what's most important to families is whether or not a school is safe. And we are able to talk about that in a variety of ways. And Redwood City has been able to demonstrate real safety. And that enables families to feel good about sending their kids to school.
Thank you. Just looking at the time, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about, since RCEF, we just recently made this shift right before the pandemic to focusing on using an equity lens to think about our funding model. And as a result, I think this allows for culturally relevant programming to be done at schools, and it allows principals and school leaderships to decide what are the needs. And when you look at our 3 community schools, we're funding similar is the mental health piece, but across the 3 schools, we're funding very different programs based on needs. So can you just talk a little bit about what it looks like to have RCEF support, and what would it look like without that funding coming from RCEF?
So the beauty of it is we get to think outside the box. We have a lot of support from our school district, a lot of partners. RCEF comes to the table and says, what do you need? There isn't this little box we have to fulfill. This year, we decided that what we really needed to focus on was a behaviorist, a teacher who could come in and support our newer teachers in the classroom with some of our students who were really struggling to adjust to how we do school. And we were trying it out. We didn't know how it was going to work. And it was wonderful because we have been given a space where this wonderful Miss Nally, a teacher, who is a special education teacher, is able to go into the classroom, work with the teacher, work with individual students, work with small groups, and really help create an environment of safety, an environment where it's okay to make mistakes and we're working together to regulate ourselves and get to learning. And without you, we wouldn't have been able to try it out. And so it was very successful. We've been able to really focus on the social emotional needs of our students versus, okay, you're going to the office because you can't sit in the class and you know, you've hit 3 kids and now we have to figure out a different way. Miss Nally goes in, figures out what's going on, and helps kids process their emotions, help them feel like they're students, like the learners, like they're getting school, and then we move on to a different group. And it's been very important to our teachers to also feel like they have a sense of control and calm. Teachers, you know, we always want control. It's who we are. And it also has helped parents because she's able to have conversations via translator about what are the things that you can do to support your child at home. So it's just a different way of doing, of supporting our students. And again, because we didn't have to fulfill this little box and RCEF said, what do you need? How can we support you? We were able to try this out.
I'll wear the RCF hat now. I've been on the receiving end where I had to convince funders to fund our amazing programs. And then it feels almost like a business investment. Oh my God, I'm not selling enough pizzas. They're going to cut funding, right? It's a very stressful, high demand sometimes when you have to prove these outcomes and you're trying to think outside the box and you're trying to think there has to be different ways to do the work, smarter, more culturally responsive, more innovative. And with RCEF, it's a true partnership. There's no gotcha moments. We are thought partners with the schools. We know that the people working with the kids, the families, the caregivers, the teachers are the experts. They know what they need. We don't need to be telling them what they need. Yes, there's research. We trust that they know the research or that we can thought partner around the research. But it's a place to have those opportunities to think, let's make a model that is truly working for this community and is truly working for our families. And that's why I chose to join our CF board, because I thought this was the most exciting vehicle of change for us to think of education, not just and see it working on the ground, but change a little bit of the conversation around education equity, around education innovation from a whole child perspective.
I'll just throw in one other hat. I'm a partner to these agencies. I don't work in a school, so I don't see the direct impact on kids. But what I do hear is the amplification of the challenges and the needs from schools into other spaces that school employees are not typically in. So I wouldn't even hear about a ton of the things that are going on in schools if it were not for RCEF. The spaces like this, but also showing up in meetings and saying, hey, I heard somebody needs a table at their school, and that's going to make the difference between whether they're able to let parents know about this thing that's going on or not. And then finding out who has a spare table that they can bring to the school. That kind of direct connecting the dots between the very engaged nonprofits in our community as part of the way I see RCEF making a difference as well.
You know, as we come to a close on our time, I just want to make sure we give space to talk about, I'm thinking back to your presentation, Brianna, right, about the different boxes and looking over at the baseball game. How does it help Redwood City School District by RCEF supporting our 3 schools? And how does supporting, you know, targeted areas of our city help the city as a whole?
I'll speak to the first part first. Back to that idea that for us to thrive as a whole city, it requires every part of our city to thrive. If we see that we have neighbors, we have people in our community that are not able to be well, to be safe, to enjoy full education, that means that none of us are going to get to the full potential that we have here. That's kind of it. That's the theory of change that's driving here. That when we make it possible for all of us for each of us to do our best and to live our best, then all of us are able to live our best. I think an analogy that might be more tangible sometimes is when we think about unhoused communities in Redwood City or in any community. When we find that there are folks who are not thriving in our community, it impacts all of our experience of being in the community. So focusing the effort and the resources on supporting folks who need that support particularly is more effective than trying to provide the same supports to everyone. That's really what I see in a lot of our work, trying to uplift so that all of us can live better.
It's hard to build on something that's perfect. The one thing I see is that by having a explicit focus on equity, we are helping create a community-wide dialogue and awareness, raising awareness about the fact that there is inequity and that our democracy depends on all of us addressing that. I think helping young people understand, helping families understand that we're all responsible for dismantling the barriers to creating, to me, the image of everyone standing at the end with liberation, that we've gone through the justice phase and have dismantled barriers to enjoy a community where everyone is liberated. That's an incredibly important vision. And by making this explicit, it helps all of us realize our role in creating that.
Thank you. The reality is that our students at the 3 schools have a very different experience than the students on the west side of El Camino. And we have an obligation to level the playing field, to not even level the playing field, to help them attain the excellence that we know they can attain.
I think this is great. I was going to ask you all, is there anything you'd want to have our audiences remember as they leave? So if there are any other thoughts, I'd love to give each of you a moment to say a last word.
I'll just say that sometimes talking about equity can feel overwhelming. Don't be overwhelmed, because there's little things we can each do to regain control, and we're doing them, and they're paying off, and they're fantastic. I want everyone to leave hopeful that we know these programs work. We know there's resources out there to help level the playing field, and that we're all contributing to it.
And Brianna had a really good last statement. I'm going to have to go back and write that down. Anything else before we conclude? No?
Just thank you for supporting us and giving us having faith in the community schools, and in that we will use the funding in the best way possible for our community in the way they need it.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank each of our panelists here this morning. I'm just so grateful for the knowledge and experience and the passion that you bring, and for sharing that with all of us here this morning. I think it is a really big topic when we talk about education, we talk about equity, we talk about issues around diversity and fairness and resources. And so I really appreciate having this time to have this discussion. I also do want to thank the many of you here who are in our audience today for believing in the work that RCEF is doing and for providing financial support. It's because of our community's thoughtful contributions that we're able to provide a bilingual mental health counselor at each of our schools. And you heard about how that helps take away any transportation barriers, any financial barriers, any linguistic barriers. We're also providing things like enrichment opportunities, things like field trips. They aren't a given. They have to come and they have to be funded. And so that's another thing that RCEF is able to provide to our schools. And then academic support. We do things like the behavioral specialist, Miss Nally at Hoover. We also support reading intervention specialists, in classroom support, after school support. Again, it really depends on what the principals and the schools need. And, by providing this financial support directly to our schools, we are allowing our schools to decide how to best fill the needs that they see at present. So I know with the weather changing, we've had the last few, it feels like forever that it's been raining and it's cold and windy, and now we're seeing the sun again. And for many of us, we're thinking about summer. But I know at RCEF, what it weighs heavily on us is that we are still $300,000 away from fully funding all of our programs at our 3 schools. And this is really 4 months left that we have until the start of the new school year. So if after hearing what is going on in our community and now understanding the value that we have in making sure all participants, all of our residents, all of our schools have the resources that they need, please come and see me. This is a work that requires community participation. It requires community effort. And sometimes when I look at that, again, I'm going back to Brianna's slides, right? When we think about just the disparity that exists here on the peninsula, it is mind-blowing to me that here in Redwood City, we struggle to raise a fraction of what our other ed foundations are raising. And we shouldn't feel okay with this. I think we really need to do better for our students. Redwood City is great because it is a diverse community, and we have a tremendous opportunity to make a difference. And I agree with Dr. Gerstein. I like the image that you had of liberation, because my hope and my vision is that one day our community will come together around our schools, support RCEF, so that we can be seen as a leader in this space, and that all of our schools, all of our students, we are seen as providing academic excellence and a healthy school environment. So I want to thank everyone for being with us here this morning. We are grateful to our partners. We do have a number of treats and coffee. Please, if you are inspired, stay, continue the conversation with us. We have our board members here. We have our panelists will be here. I will be here. So I invite us all to continue to build community.